You know it's this. Take a perk and a talk of this shit. Money swallowing like sis. Did it perfect in the kid. Got a billion who sang on my head. Look at better put on the road I just spent. I know we got $1 million. The devil that shit ain't not cheap again.
Hello and welcome back, fellow anime lovers, to MangaMuse. I am delighted to have you join us once again in the world of fanfiction and fantasy. This is the third part of What If Deku Meets Castlevania. Special note, this fanfic is written and a masterpiece of the gentleman with a mustache on FANFICTIONnet. Do check and support the author too. Now smash the like, share and subscribe button for more. Also press the bell icon so that you never miss such great parts. Thanks for the introduction. Now let's dive into the world. You're going on a date with Midoriya. Mina exclaimed. DMN, I was hoping to score one with him. Himiko pouted. Well yes, I am going on a date with him. Yaoyorozu said nervously. Well, lucky you. We should get you all ready for it. When are you two going? Hagakure asked, to which she answered. We decided to go during our trip at the mall. Hey, what a time. I actually have a date as well. Mina said excitedly. Oh. With whom? Scarlet asked, looking at the pink-skinned girl. With the wonderful Ace. She said with a bright smile. Oh, that's wonderful, Ashido. Yaoyorozu smiled. I assume you're going on this date at the mall trip as well. Yep. How did you score that? Hagakure asked. Well, it was actually after the exams. After he was treated, we talked for a bit, congratulating each other for making it out. Then he asked me out, I asked him why and he said that he fancied me. He was just so charming. So I accepted. Wow, the boys are being taken fast. Best get them while you can. Jiro joked. Don't forget the girls. Himiko joked as well. The girls all giggled while Jiro blushed. So did Uraraka. Well, let's get you two freshened up. Scarlet proposed, rubbing her hands together. Oh, my baby boy is growing up. He's going on a date with a pretty girl. Inko Midoriya cried out with tears pouring down her cheeks. Izuku blushed as he looked away. Mom, please don't cry. It's just a date. I know, dear, it's just such a tremendous occasion for you. Izuku couldn't deny that. Not since coming to you. Has he ever had any friends or any potential love life. This was his first date. He didn't want to screw it up. Speaking of Inko, when she first saw Midoriya with his injuries, she threatened Dracula as well as Nizu by pulling Midoriya out of UA. However, thanks to Dracula using his wicked and charming tongue to convince her. However, she threatened that if another injury happened, Inko would pull him out, disregarding if Midoriya resisted. Midoriya never saw her so angry, but Dracula just seemed unfazed. Back to Midoriya, he had a white shirt on, along with a short-sleeved button shirt, with some dress pants and his typical red shoes. He also had some product in his hair, to make it a bit more controlled. He was dropped off at the mall where Yaoyorozu stood at the entrance. She wore a short black dress with a large black derby hat to cover herself from the sun. She wore a pair of black heels and had a tiny purse. Midoriya couldn't see the detail or her subtle makeup, but he was still starstruck. Hello, Midoriya. Yaoyorozu smiled at him, to which he blushed and stuttered. Hi, Yaoyorozu. He looked away, embarrassed by his stuttering. She giggled and stepped closer to him. You look handsome today. He blushed and stuttered. Anyul look appealing. She couldn't blush because of the state of her body, but she felt like she would. Thank you. Shall we go inside now? Why, yeah. That sounds good. Midoriya walked with her, feeling small compared to her. Immediately, he could see the vibrations of everyone in the mall. It almost felt overwhelming for him, but thanks to a combination of either changing the settings in his headwear, as well as being near Momo, made it more bearable for him. Midoriya? You okay? Momo asked, to which he took a deep breath. Why yeah. Everything was just really overwhelming. We don't have to be here if you don't have to. No. It's fine now. Just needed to get my bearings. Midoriya looked up at her with a soft smile. Hey you guys. Ashido shouted. The two looked to see Ashido and Ace waiting by a fountain. Ashido was wearing a pink dress with white sneakers, while Ace wore a white buttoned-up shirt with his sleeves rolled up and jeans and black Vans. He still had his Plague Doctor mask on as he waved at the two. Hello you two. Momo said with a smile while Midoriya smiled nervously. It's good to see you guys. I hope you both have a great date. Ace said before Ashido spoke. Let's go, Ace. I need some sunscreen. Ashido and Ace walked off with a wave to Momo and Midoriya. The two looked at each other before Midoriya asked. So, what would you like to do first? Well, I'm thinking about getting some food. Momo said while brushing some dandruff off her dress. Oh cool, I was actually getting a bit hungry. He said with a smile. And so the two made their way towards the food hall and found the food they were looking for. They sat down at a table before Midoriya asked. So even though you're a vampire, you're able to eat regular food? Yes, Mstr Teeps explained it like this. While BLD is our only source of nutrition, human food is something like a nostalgic taste. Something we could live without but can't because it tastes good. Also my quirk still works even though my body is dead. Somehow. Fascinating. Midoriya whispered as he took a bite of his katsudon. While he couldn't see his food in color, the noise around gave him the sight to see what he was eating. The two ate in silence, simply enjoying each other's company. That was until Midoriya asked, so? How has being a vampire been for you? Oh, it's different. But I think I can make do with it. Have you discovered any new powers? Well, aside from my new vision that lets me see the colors and what makes them who they are, nothing else. Well, I'd be more than happy to help you learn. He proposed, to which she smiled at him. Thank you Midoriya. I'd gladly take your help. After they finished their food, Midoriya and Momo got to walk around the mall and even saw Ashido and Ace looking around a clothes shop. The pink-skinned student was laughing at something Ace said. What do you think? Those two together? Midoriya asked Momo, to which she answered, well it sure was surprising, but I'm sure they can make it work. Midoriya looked at her with a tiny smile before she said. Midoriya, I need to use the restroom, will you wait for me? Of course, Yaoyorozu. Midoriya said, to which she nodded before waking towards the restrooms. He leaned up against the wall before asking, how am I doing, Ever? You are doing quite well, Midoriya. Wait, villain behind you. Midoriya turned around to and grabbed the person's wrist. Wow, you've got some good reflexes, brat. Wait a minute. That voice. It's you, Shigaraki. Midoriya paled. Yeah, now shut up and walk with me. We're just two friends catching up. Now let go of my wrist or I dust you. Midoriya's hand shook before letting go and Shigaraki put his arm around Midoriya's shoulder and 4 of his fingers were placed on his neck, making him shake a little harder. The two found their way to a fountain where Shigaraki rasped, you know. The recent news about Stain is all they talk about. Nothing about the Nomus attacking Hosu. Why is that? Why are we not taken seriously? We infiltrated the USJ, attacked you brats, and what? We're not even taken seriously. It's because no one knows your motive. Midoriya said. Motive? We cause chaos and destruction and we want to kill All Might. Is that not motive enough? Is it? Shigaraki tightened his grip on his neck, making Midoriya gulp. Everyone understands Stain's motive. He hates heroes who use their powers for selfish reasons. He wants change for society. We don't agree with his means. But we understand what he wants. Huh. You're a smart cookie. Also, what's with the headgear? You got a catboy FTSH or something? He asked, looking at the metal cat ears on Midoriya's head. And no. It's to help me see and sense my surroundings. You got blinded? Shigaraki asked, to which Midoriya nodded. Huh. Well, I don't care if you're blind or deaf, you're one of the people that pisses me off the most and I want to kill, but I know someone who's eager to see you again. Who? Midoriya asked with a shaking voice, dreading whoever it is. Well, he's loud and likes to explode things. Midoriya gasped as he turned to look up at him. And no. That's right. Your friend Bakugo joined us. All thanks to that new teacher of yours. Shigaraki smirked. You know, you're all he talks about. Saying how Deku is his to kill. Deku this. Deku that. It's really getting annoying that I may just kill him before you see him. Midoriya. Momo's voice shouted, prompting them to look to see Momo walk towards them. What happened? I grew worried. She gasped as she realized who Midoriya was with. It's fine, Yaoyorozu. Yeah, it's fine. I was just leaving anyway. Shigaraki let go of Midoriya's neck and began walking away. Midoriya gasped and took deep breaths while massaging his neck. Yaoyorozu ran towards him before placing her hands on his arms. Midoriya. Are you okay? Did he hurt you? She asked, to which he tried to cry. Shigaraki. He said Bakugo joined him. He's coming after me. Midoriya said as he looked at her. Her eyes widened before pulling him in for a hug. Later that afternoon, Yaoyorozu called the police and the mall was closed down. Detective Tsukachi arrived to get Midoriya and Yaoyorozu's statement. By the end, Midoriya spoke about Katsuki Bakugo joining the League of Villains. I want to thank you for your time, you two. We'll put out a warrant for his arrest and speak with his parents about this. He spoke before leading the two out of the police district and towards the entrance where Midoriya's mother, Yaoyorozu's parents and Dracula stood. Inko Midoriya cried out as she ran towards Midoriya. Oh Izuku. Are you okay? Are you hurt? He hugged her. I am okay, Mom. Momo's mother and father walked towards her and brought her in for a hug. Oh sweetie. Are you okay? Momo's mother asked her with worry in her voice. I'm alright, mother. Momo said as she wrapped her arms around her parents. You had us worried, dear. Her father said as he rubbed her back. Oh honey, please don't scare me like that again. I don't think my heart could take it. Inko said, on the verge of crying. Before looking at Momo, oh, I'm so sorry. I'm Inko Midoriya. Hi, Mrs. Midoriya, I'm Momo Yaoyorozu, these are my parents. Hello. It's a pleasure to meet you both. Inko said before bowing before them, along with Izuku. Hello, I'm Kira Yaoyorozu, this is my husband, Hanzo. The two bowed back as well. So you must be the boy my little girl went on a date. Hanzo said, looking at Izuku who shook nervously. Father, please don't scare him. Momo said, looking at him worried. Oh honestly, Hanzo. Kira said with a roll of her eyes. Alright, I jest. Sorry boy. I just wanted to try on the tough father act once. He laughed slightly. Oh, pleasure to meet you sir. Izuku said with a nervous voice. Our daughter talked about you a bit. Kira said, to which Momo looked at her mother, embarrassed. Mother. Alright, that's enough embarrassing your children. Dracula said, walking towards them. Midoriya looked up at his teacher and said with worry. Mr. Teeps. Are you alright, Midoriya? Dracula crouched down to look at his student. I am okay. Sir. It's Bakugo. He joined the League of Villains. Midoriya said, to which Dracula's eyes widened slightly. He closed his eyes and sighed. I should have seen this coming. You all best get home. They nodded. Momo looked at Izuku and smiled. For what it's worth, I had a fun time. I did too. Perhaps we can do another one. One without a villain attack. Midoriya asked as she smiled. Before pressing her lips against his cheek. He shivered at the feeling of her cold lips and blushed like a tomato. He watched as Momo and her family walked away to their limo. Dracula looked at Inko Midoriya. Mrs. Midoriya, I do not suggest going home, not without protection. What do you mean? Inko asked. Bakugo knows where you live, yes. He asked, to which she realized. What am I to do? She asked, to which Dracula replied. We'll have to begin a little early, but our intention was to create a dormitory system at UA. Since Bakugo has joined the league, he knows where you live and he may hurt you to hurt Midoriya. We're willing to let you stay at UA for the time being so you may be protected. Inko looked down before looking back up at him. Oh, okay. I'll have to get some things. Then let us waste no time. Dracula said, leading them to her car. This was the beginning of change. Whether for good or bad, it was anyone's guess. I'm sorry that our date was ruined. Ace said solemnly. Oh, it's okay. At least no one got hurt. Ashido said with a sad smile. The two of them were walking down the sidewalk, near Ashido's house. For what it's worth, I had an amazing time, Ace. She said as she looked at him. He looked at her as well. His lens showed his eyes, one was blue while the other was white with his screla a bloodshot red. If you don't mind me asking, but can I see you without the mask? Ashido asked. Ace looked a bit uncomfortable as his right hand lingered on the beak. I don't know. I'm not exactly good looking. Ashido looked at him with a sad smile. Hey, we all have something that makes us different. I mean, look at me. My acid irritated my skin so bad, I've got this pink tone and my eyes look awful. I would never judge you for how you look. Ace looked at her, before pulling his mask off, revealing his face to her. Her eyes widened before placing a hand on his cheek. You said a villain did this to you? She whispered to him, horrified. Yeah. It happened in my middle school back in London. Me and my brother, Jack, were in science class. You had a brother? Ashido asked, to which Ace nodded. Yeah. My brother died in the attack. But I survived. She looked at him before hugging him tightly, which surprised him. He hugged her back before she looked up at him before closing her eyes and pressing her lips against his. His eyes widened in surprise before closing them and kissed back. She pulled back and looked at him with a smile. Never be scared of what you look like. I won't force you to take off the mask, but think about taking it off some more. You look really handsome, Ace. He was silent, thinking about her words before she continued. We should do this again another time. Maybe after our trip. He nodded with a smile. Yeah. I'd like that. She giggled and smiled at him. Well, I'll see you again, Ace. You too, Ashido. Ace said before slipping the plague doctor mask back on. Mina. Call me Mina. She said as she walked up the stairs to her door. Okay. Mina. She smiled before opening the door and walking inside. Ace looked at her door before walking away. Off on the other side of the road, a man with black hair and red eyes glared at him. You've been lucky before. But it's about to run out. The camping trip was nearly here. Everyone was excited, so was Midoriya. He couldn't wait to learn all he could to try and better his quirk. Despite the bad ending to his and Yaoyorozu's date, they were honestly hoping to do another date. They contacted each other and agreed to have another date after the camping trip. They even talked with Ace and Ashido, who also were on a date, and they actually got a little further than them. They actually got to first base, much to the surprise of everyone, but they supported the duo. As of right now, Midoriya, in his very own dormitory, was looking over the items and clothes he packed up for the trip when he got a knock on his door. He walked to the door and opened it to see Dracula and All Might in his shrunken form. "Ah! Mr. Teeps. Hey All Might. What can I do for you?" Midoriya shook and stood rigid in their presence. "Calm down, Midoriya," Dracula said with a sigh. "Can we come in, young Midoriya?" Toshinori Yagi asked, to which Midoriya gulped before nodding and stepping off to the side to let the two teachers in. They walked in and sweat dropped at the sight of Midoriya's room. It was filled to the brim with All Might merch. Including plastic statues, posters, and even the wallpaper was color-coded to All Might's costume. "Midoriya, we need to have a talk later about this," Dracula said, looking at Midoriya, who became embarrassed. All right, sir." Midoriya looked down, to which Yagi sighed. "Well, what we really wanted to talk about is important. Specifically about One for All and its origins." Midoriya's head snapped up as he looked at them. "Oh, okay." Yagi grabbed a chair from his desk and set it in front of the bed. "Please sit down, young Midoriya, and listen very carefully." Izuku sat down and looked at them, and Dracula started the story. "You see, One for All began over 200 years ago, when quirks were first introduced to the world. It was a time of chaos. Societal progression stagnated, governments collapsed, and hate and fear had spread." Yagi continued. "While those with quirks tried to live, the quirkless made hate groups in hopes of stamping out those they considered less than human. Much like the neo-Nazi groups against those of colored skin. The ones with quirks lived in fear. However, there was one that could have been seen as beacon of hope to them. All he ever did was spread more fear. His name was All for One." Midoriya had a shiver go down his spine at the name. He could already tell the implications behind that name. Dracula picked it up from there. All for One could take and give quirks as he pleased. He took quirks from those who didn't want it or because it would suit his needs. He gave quirks to those who would serve him. However, the physical and mental strain of having multiple quirks, especially when they weren't trained, had become mindless minions. "Like the Nomus?" Midoriya asked, to which they nodded. "Exactly," Yagi said. All for One ruled Japan's criminal empire, spreading chaos. However, he had a quirkless little brother who was frail and sickly but had a strong sense of justice. The little brother wanted nothing to do with All for One's reign. All for One himself gave him a quirk, whether out of pity or a sick need to control his brother, nobody could be sure. This quirk wasn't very spectacular on its own. Merely to stockpile power. Power, the younger brother didn't have. However, what no one knew was that the younger brother had a quirk all along. He had the ability to pass down his quirk. So when All for One gave him that stockpiling quirk, the two quirks combined and became One for All. Yagi said with his arms spread open. Midoriya looked at him with widened eyes. Since then, for 200 years, it has been an endless cycle of All for One and the wielder of One for All fighting. However, it always ended with the wielder dying. But there was always a successor to pass it down to. There have been 8 users. With you being the 9th user of One for All. Dracula finished. Midoriya took in the information and took a deep breath. He looked at Toshinori Yagi and asked what happened to All for One. He lifted his shirt to reveal the injury he sustained. Midoriya's eyes widened and gasped. "You mean? He was the one to hurt you that bad?" Yagi nodded. Yeah, even though I also gave him a deathly injury, I thought it was over. But these past few months have made me realize he survived. Midoriya looked at him wide with fear. But you'll stop him, right? I mean, you're All Might. You're the #1 hero of Japan. You defeated him before, you can do it again. Tears threatened to spill from his eyes. Yagi was silent with a frown on his skeletal face. Not if he's alone. Dracula said, making Midoriya look up at him as he got down on one knee and placed his hand on the boy's shoulder in comfort. He's carried this burden for too long, and we're not going to train you to fight All for One. We're training you to become the best hero you can be. Once All for One reveals himself, All Might and I will defeat him. You won't go anywhere near him, understand? Midoriya looked at his teacher before wiping his tears away from his eyes and sniffling before looking back and nodded. I understand. Though I do have a question. How did you learn about One for All? Dracula frowned as memories flashed in his head. A woman with black hair and gray eyes smiled at him. Her laugh was angelic as if he could still hear her. Her voice whispered to him. I love you, Vlad. I was with the 7th user. She was my light. When I was at my lowest, her smile and offering hand gave me a sense of hope. We were at that point where she spoke to me about the quirk and the legacy it had. That's also when I met Toshinori Yagi. She was looking for a successor and she believed he was the perfect choice. Midoriya looked at him with wonder before asking. What? What happened to her? The same thing that happened to all the past users. Dracula said in a surprisingly bitter tone. She was murdered by All for One. Midoriya's eyes widened before bowing his head. I am so sorry, Mr. Teeps. Dracula shook his head. It's okay, Midoriya. He took a deep breath before ruffling his green hair slightly. Well, I'll leave you two be. Dracula phased through the door, leaving Midoriya and Yagi alone. Will he be okay? Midoriya asked in a worried tone. Yagi spoke solemnly. My mentor's death shook us. Him the most because they were in love. It took a long time for him to get over her death. I suppose. He never did. Midoriya looked at the door where Dracula phased through and felt a lot of sympathy for him. The day ended in sadness as Dracula looked at a ring on his necklace. Midoriya was shaken awake by Hitoshi. Hey Midoriya. Wake up. We're here. Midoriya blinked and rubbed his eyes to see Hitoshi next to him. Oh hi Hitoshi. The indigo-haired student spoke. Hi. Now come on, let's get going. The two got out of the bus to see his classmates looking confused. That was until Midoriya saw two women next to Dracula. Both wore large cat paws with different colored dresses. One was older with reddish-brown hair while the other was younger with long blonde hair and blue eyes. Next to them was a young boy with a red hat with horns. Midoriya gasped, it's the Wild Wild Pussycats. The #1 hero rescue team. Everyone looked at them in surprise. Looks like we've got a fanboy here. The red-haired hero said with a smirk. Yes. As you can see, class. I've asked the Wild Wild Pussycats to help us with your training. They specialize in rescue, specifically in the mountains. I'm Mandalay, leader of the team. Mandalay, the red-haired cat girl said with a wave. I'm Pixie Bob. The blonde said before winking at them. And this is my nephew, Koda. Mandalay said, pointing to the boy who waved. Hi everyone. Can't wait to see your quirks in action. Sir. Why aren't we at the agency building? Ida asked Dracula with his hand raised. The king of vampires looked at his students with a rather sinister smirk, his fangs revealed. That's because your training begins now. The agency building is about 20 miles in front of you, however you have to go through a miniature obstacle course. If you're quick enough, it'll take you about 3 hours, where you can get lunch. Mandalay said while Pixie Bob giggled before using her quirk to make all the classmates slide down the cliff. UBSTRD. The entire class shouted at Dracula as he looked down the cliff with a smirk. Kota couldn't help but laugh before getting in the car. They won't make it to lunch. On the ground, Midoriya coughed up some dust before groaning as he stood up. What the hell was that about? Kirishima asked while rolling his neck. Should have expected that. Shoji wiped off the dirt from his arms. A loud roar got everyone's attention to see a dragon made out of stone and dirt. Let's go. Midoriya said before sprinting towards the dirt creature. The rest of his class followed suit. Welcome to the summer camping trip. I choose red. Kota placed down a wild card on the table. Ah darn. Pixie Bob groaned as she pulled card after card, trying to find a red card. Until she placed a red 3 on the table. Mandalay smirked and placed her red card down. Uno. Kota paled as he tried to find a card to stop her aunt from winning. It was roughly 3 o'clock in the afternoon when Dracula, Mandalay, Pixie Bob, and Kota noticed Class 1A emerge from the sea of trees. They all looked dirted, bruised, and thoroughly exhausted. Dracula pulled out a pocket watch from inside his coat and looked at the time. 3 p.m. Well done, all of you. Wow. That's almost the exact time it took us. Mandalay said as she looked at them before placing her card down and shouted, I win. Kota and Pixie Bob groaned before planting their faces on the table. The whole class sat down on the ground, just so they could catch their breath and relax. Ashido sat down next to Ace with her head on his shoulder. Midoriya and Yaoyorozu sat down near each other and inexplicably placed their hand on each other. Because you've gotten here in record time, you have the rest of the day to recuperate. But rest assured, what you experienced was merely a fraction of what is to come in the next 2 weeks. Dracula said, which made everyone groan loudly. I'm beginning to hate our teacher. Kaminari groaned, to which several made noises of agreement. If you hate me now, then you'll absolutely loathe me by the end. Dracula said with a sadistic grin, appearing in front of him, which made him scream like a girl. The Class 1A teacher stood back up and spoke as the students looked up at him in fear. Your training will push you to your absolute limits and mayhaps beyond. The only time you stop is when it is the afternoon, or you pass out. I will expect nothing less. Dracula finished when a voice shouted from behind him. You! Dracula made a face of irritation when he turned around to look at the teacher of Class 1B of Lad King. He greeted respectfully. So, you just let your students rest after the bus ride? I thought you were serious about training your students. Seems I was mistaken. The white-haired teacher snarled at him, making Dracula look at him with burning red eyes. Your students just arrive? He asked Vlad King, to which he nodded sharply. Well, in the time it took for them to arrive, I've had my students run a little obstacle course that took them 3 hours to complete. Look at how exhausted they are. Do you call that not taking it seriously? Dracula began to step closer to him, making the teacher grow nervous and a drop of sweat drop down his face. I think it's you who is not taking their students' training seriously. Dracula began to walk away from Vlad King, having said his piece. All of the students, as well as the 2 Pussycat members and Kota looking shocked at him. I'm scared. Scarlet shuddered. Same. Toru Hagakure agreed. Right. Mandalay said, breaking the awkwardness, addressing the students' attention. Well, let's get introductions out of the way. I'm Mandalay, leader of the Wild Pussycats. Pixie Bob introduced herself with a grin as she looked at several of the male students. Specifically, Ida, Todoroki, Ace, and Midoriya. I'm Pixie Bob. Youngest of the Wild Pussycats and single, ready to mingle. Especially with either of you boys. The 4 became a little uncomfortable, that was until Pixie Bob began sniffing the air, looking at Midoriya and Ace. Realizing the scent, she groaned. "DMN it. 2 of you are already taken. If you're quite done, Pixie Bob, I'd like to get my students fed." Dracula glared at her, his mood not quite lifted from Vlad King's idiocy. "Sorry." Pixie Bob stepped back. Mandalay placed a hand on the top of Koda's hat. "This little guy is my nephew, Koda." He waved at everyone. "Hi everyone." Midoriya walked towards him and held his hand out to him. "Hi Koda. I'm izukumidoriya. Do you plan on becoming a hero?" Midoriya asked, to which Koda grinned and shook his hand. "Hell yeah. I plan to become a hero just like my mom and dad." "Koda, watch your language." Mandalay chastised him. Koda mumbled an apology and Midoriya asked, "Who are your parents?" "They're the water hose duo." Midoriya gasped. Despite no longer having normal eyes, people could see a specific shine in his artificial eyes. "The water hose duo. They're one of the best rescue hero teams." "Alright, you two can talk about it later. Let's get you all fed," Dracula said, breaking it off before Midoriya went complete fanboy. Food was laid out on the tables outside the building, to which everyone sat around and began to eat and talk. Dracula leaned against the building, watching his students with a small smile, as they all reminded him of his time with Team RWBY and JNPR. All good kids who want to save the world, yet naive to the way the world truly works. So, his mood was now improved. Looking at Momo Yaoyorozu, seeing how she interacts with Midoriya made his smile grow a little more. Himiko walked up to Dracula, looking up at her father and asked, "Hey Dad, you okay?" He gazed down at his adoptive daughter and smiled. "I'm feeling better, dear. How are you?" "Ah well, I'm sore as hell right now." "Don't worry, once you're all finished, you'll have a nice hot bath to help relax your muscles," Dracula said, patting her head. "Thanks Dad." Himiko smiled before walking back to the tables where she talked to Uraraka. Dracula smiled and finished his food before walking into the agency building. "Ah. This feels really good," Hagakure exclaimed as the female students sunk into the hot water. "I feel relaxed already," Ochiko Uraraka said as she released a relief-filled sigh. "I could just sleep in this water." Scarlet sighed while closing her eyes. "I know what you mean," Himiko said, sinking down a bit into the water. "So Mina, how was the date with Ace?" Jiro asked the pink-skinned girl, who gave off a dreamy sigh. "Well, he doesn't lie when he says he's a gentleman. He was wonderful during the date. Even when the mall was shut down, he still tried to salvage a good time for us," Mina said with a smile. "Sounds like you guys had an amazing time." Momo smiled at her. Hagakure asked, "How far did you go with him?" To which Mina's skin turned a shade of lavender. "Ah well, we actually kissed." "Really? Cheek or lips?" Ochiko asked, leaning forward a bit. "It was the lips," Mina said, not wanting to let out that she got to see underneath Ace's plague doctor mask. It wasn't something to boast about, and she wanted to keep Ace's trust. He'll show everyone what he looked like when he was ready. The girls cheered for her, got past to first base. "Well done, Ashido." Scarlet clapped a bit. "Did you see under his mask?" Jiro asked while twirling her ear jack a bit. "Ah. Well no. He only lifted up a bit for my lips to meet with his." Mina lied, her mind playing images of what she saw him look like. She then focused on Momo. "So what about you, Yamamoto? How was your date with Midoriya?" The girls became interested in what she would say. "Ah well, he was also wonderful. He was considerate, always seemed interested in what I talked about. He's truly a wonderful person." "Any thoughts about a second date?" Rib bit. Sue asked, while putting a finger to her lips. Actually yes, we do plan on a second date. We believe sometime after this trip. Mina gasped, I do too. Me and Ace plan to go on another date as well. Coincidence? I think not. Scarlet cheekily said, to which the girls giggled. Himiko looked at Ochiko to see her face contorting into a face of hidden jealousy. She'd file that for later. So Midoribro. How was the date with Yayorozu? Kirishima asked the green-haired student. Well. Yeah, what was it like dating a total hottie like her? Kaminari asked. It was great. I had a fun time with her. Midoriya said with a nervous smile. Bully good of you mate. Ace said, the lens on his mask becoming fogged up, to which Ace began rubbing to clear the fog. How far did you get with her? First base. You get to touch her? Kaminari asked, leaning closer. Kaminari, do not ask such inappropriate questions about the vice president. And not to Midoriya. Ida chastised him with the robotic wave of his arm. Oh come on. I was just asking. Kaminari whined. What of you, Ace? Kirishima looked at the British exchange student. How was Mina? Oh, we had a bloody good time. After the mall closed, we tried to do other stuff so that the date wasn't ruined. Sounds like you guys had a fun time. Any details we should know? Hitoshi asked. Well, we actually kissed. Hey, good job man. Got passed to first base. What about you, Midoribro? Kirishima looked from Ace to Midoriya. Oh well, it was only the cheek. DMN, I was hoping for better details. Kaminari groaned. Dude, it's just first date, lay off. Siro groaned at the electrical type person. Well, we're all happy for you, Midoriya. Hitoshi said, smiling slightly at him. Midoriya smiled back, looking at the water and how his vision interpreted it. The blue waves that mapped out his view continued as he could see his hand and the bubbles of liquid that stuck to his skin. He looked back up at his classmates, thanks you guys. Of course, I must be sure to remind you, Midoriya, that there is to be no inappropriate behavior in class or on campgrounds. Ida respectfully reminded him with a chop of his hand. Midoriya sighed at his antics but smiled anyway. Thanks Ida. This would be their last moment of peace. At least for quite a while. Dracula was laying down on his bed, thinking about everything that has happened for the past 20 to 30 years. His arrival in the world, to learning of the future of said world. Quirks, heroes, villains. Finding a place in such a world. Nana Shimura. Joining All Might in the fight against All for One. Discovering Himiko and adopting her. Having SEC with Miruko as a means of releasing stress until it began to turn into love. Finding love with Midnight and starting a polygamous relationship with the two. Training Himiko before being asked to become a teacher at UA. And the rest was history. A notification from his phone broke his thoughts only to discover it to be a photo. One he enjoyed very much. It was Midnight, NDE as the day she was born, cuddling with Miruko, who was also NDE. A text below the picture saying, Midnight, we need some kingly loving. Dracula smirked before disappearing in a pitch-black mist. It was certainly a long night for the trio. It was early in the morning when everyone from Class 1B woke up. Itsuka Kendo, class president, groaned as she rubbed her eyes of the weariness. Tokeage Setsuna rolled her neck in a circle and asked Kendo. Do you think that new teacher had a point? Kendo had a conflicted look on her face. On one hand, she wanted to defend Vlad King, her teacher, about how he was well within his power to teach the class how he wanted to. However, on the other hand, seeing how Class 1A had done, how successful they have been compared to them. Even though several B-class students got to the final round in the sports festival, they never really got any publicity. The class were hoping for a better opportunity, but they haven't. It never helped that Monoma constantly prattled on about surpassing them. Vlad King never really cracked down on his behavior, and Kendo constantly hitting the back of his head was not doing anything. All in all, change was needed in Class 1B. Well, I do think we could be doing better. And Monoma really needs to learn when to shut up. Kendo said as she began walking out of the bedrooms. No kidding. Any more of his bullshit and I would have strangled him in his sleep. Setsuna said with a yawn. Please watch your language. It's too early in the morning. The rest of the class got out of the building and began to walk towards the clearing in the forest. Each and every single student was dragging their feet when they made it out to see nothing short of hell. They watched as Ida continuously ran for miles with no stop. Kaminari was releasing bursts of electricity to increase the voltage without short-circuiting his brain. Shoji was creating more and more appendages to reach his limit. Ashido was shooting out an endless stream of acid and keeping it a consistent lethality level. Yayorozu was eating a shitload of food and making a continuous stream of various objects and weapons. Todoroki was switching between a large area of ice before melting it with his fire. Ace was fighting against Tiger, along with Hagakure. Zero was shooting out an endless supply of tape. Scarlet was releasing swarms of crows, making her extremely tired from the amount of her soul that has left her body. Himiko was trying to use the quirks of those she has taken the form of. Tokoyami was learning how to control dark shadow in a cave. Hitoshi was trying to learn how to control someone without the person even responding to him. Midoriya was doing various exercises while having One for All powered up throughout his body. Jiro was increasing the range in which she could hear, while attempting to strengthen her exposure to loud noises. Uraraka was using her quirk on a single rock and held it up for as much as she could and pushing past the nausea. Tsuyu was doing various exercises and stretches to increase her flexibility. Aoyama was shooting short bursts of his belly laser to decrease his stomach aches. Kirishima hardened his entire body and fought against Pixie Bob's earth creatures to increase his durability. Ojiro was doing various exercises with his tail to help strengthen it along with his body. And in the middle, Dracula watched with his hands behind his back before turning around at the students of Class 1B with a smirk that revealed his fangs. Welcome to hell. Ibra Shiozaki, the holy woman with vines for hair, shuddered as she made the cross gesture. He is an unholy creature. He seems like someone I would worship in my spare time. Reiko Yanagi said with her usual emotionless voice. Setsuna shivered as she watched all of this before whispering to Kendo, on second thought. I think Vlad-sensei is doing just fine. Kendo took a deep breath through her nose before exhaling out her mouth. No. I don't think he is. This guy knows exactly what he's doing. Let's get through this, guys. It was currently 1 in the afternoon and everyone was thoroughly exhausted but still continued their exercises. Dracula walked around offering whatever advice was possible. Pixie Bob watched with a sort of SXL grin as she created more earth creatures for Kirishima. Dracula walked towards Himiko, whom was hunched over. Hey, my little Draculina. She panted and looked up at him. Hey Dad. I'm in need of a BLD bag. Dracula nodded before walking to a cooler where he opened it and pulled out a BLD bag before handing it to her. She grabbed it before sucking on it. Once it was empty, she panted but felt better. Thanks Dad. Dracula smiled and patted her head. Of course. Just remember to keep yourself hydrated. Not just on BLD. She nodded before turning into Uraraka and placing all 5 fingers on a large rock and making it float. Dracula walked away from his adoptive daughter towards Scarlet who was hunched over with her hands on her knees. Scarlet. The French transfer student looked up, her ears flattened down as she panted out, "Oui, Mr. Teeps. Tell me what's wrong." Dracula crouched down to her level. I am trying to get used to having a lot of my quirk outside my body. But, it just makes me weak. Like I lose pieces of my soul. Scarlet said, her already pale skin looking deathly. Dracula frowned, take a break, Scarlet. We may have to look into support items for you. We'll work on that later, now rest. Scarlet nodded before sitting down and took a deep breath. She grabbed a nearby water bottle and took a big gulp of it. Ragdoll, the green-haired member of the Wild Pussycats, was doing her best to help Hitoshi. By responding in her mind. Come on Hitoshi. You're almost there. I actually felt a little tingle in my brain. Dracula stood up straight before walking off from Scarlet. He walked towards Momo Yaoyorozu, who had her large black hat on, just to help block out the sun. How are you, Yaoyorozu? Dracula asked, to which she answered. Well, I think I'm doing good on my quirk, but I could use help with my other powers. Dracula nodded in understanding. I understand. Once night comes, I will train you. Just be prepared. She nodded before the both of them smelled BLD. And then a scream rang out, making everyone stop what they're doing. The source of the scream was Midoriya. He was on his hands and knees with streams of green lightning coming from his hands. He screamed from the feeling of them convulsing from inside his arm and knuckles. Everyone watched horrified and yet in morbid curiosity from what was happening to Izukumidoriya. Dracula rushed towards Midoriya and shouted, Izuku. Calm yourself. Midoriya was genuinely terrified as he lost control. I can't. Help me. Dracula moved closer, dodging the green lightning before placing his hands on the sides of his head. Reaching into his mind, he felt the minds of the previous users of One for All. He spoke in his mind, Izuku, I want you to relax your body. Concentrate your mind. Izuku panted heavily as the green lightning turned straight before retreating back into his arm. Dracula let go of his head before picking him up bridal style. He looked at all the students along with the wild pussycats. Resume your training, I'll take him back to the agency. Everyone went back to what they were doing, while Momo watched with extreme concern. Will he be okay? Kota asked, looking at Midoriya as he was laid on the couch. Mandalay sat down beside Kota as they watched him. He will be. Dracula said before standing up straight. Will you be able to look after him? Yeah, I got it. Kota, would you go with Dracula to see how everyone's doing? Mandalay asked Kota, who sighed but nodded. Sure. Dracula walked out with Kota, leaving Mandalay with Izuku Midoriya. He shifted and groaned before trying to sit up. Whoa, hold on there, Midoriya. She put her hand on his shoulder to push him back down on the couch. He groaned, Is everyone okay? Mandalay nodded, they're fine. We're just worried about you. From what Teeps told me, you unlocked a part of your quirk. Midoriya looked at his arm, yeah. I think I did. He looked up at the leader, actually. I wanted to ask, how did you meet Mr. Teeps? She smiled, well. I met him a couple years ago. You know how Kota's parents were the water hose duo? He nodded. Well, there was an attack by the villain, Muscular, and they were the only ones in the immediate area that could have stopped him. It was getting bad, that was until he showed up. He actually managed to beat him down, and save them. Izuku looked at her amazed before blinking in confusion. Wait, why was it never broadcasted? We would have known about it. Mandalay explained, well, he asked for himself to be kept from the news and public. He's an underground hero, much like Eraserhead, but he's more like a ghost. Oh, I see. I guess that makes sense. Izuku now realized why. Because he was a vampire and he was possibly the most dangerous hero he's ever seen. Possibly even more than All Might. If he was to go fully public, people could have feared him. However, what he didn't realize, was that it would be even worse than just that. The Hero Commission. Since then, those two, same as me, have been indebted to him. I can't imagine what would have happened if he wasn't there to save them. Kota would have grown up without his parents, and who knows what he would have been like. Mandalay said before pulling out a photo from her wallet that showed her and Kota, along with two people with scuba diving tanks and life vests. Izuku looked at the photo with amazement before leaning back. Seems like you've got a great family. Midoriya said with a smile. Yeah. It's thanks to Teeps. Anyway, are you ready to go back? Mandalay asked, to which he nodded. The two made their way out of the agency building and back to the clearing where Dracula was speaking with Ace about his fighting style. That was until Ace looked over at Midoriya, which made Dracula look behind to see the green-haired student walk towards him. Midoriya, are you feeling any better? He nodded, to which Dracula sighed. Right, now we'll be focusing on this new quirk of yours. He nodded before taking a deep breath and looked at Dracula. Later that night, up on a hill overlooking the camp and agency building, we could see several people looking down. A man with blackish blue hair along with purple scars stapled together. It was Dobby. A man with a peach suit along with a mask and top hat. It was Mr. Compress. Another man wearing a black suit with a tattered and torn coat and a scythe. His hair was jet black with a blank black mask on his face with a red crow painted on it. A person in a black leather straight jacket that kept muttering about flesh. It was Moonfish. A kid in a student uniform with a gas mask. His name was Mustard. A person in a black and white jumpsuit with white eyes stood next to them. It was Twice. A person wearing a white shirt and red button-up shirt with glasses on. Magna was her name. Finally, Bakugo. Wearing a black tank top, along with military pants, combat boots, and a more robust version of his grenade gauntlets. Time to show them that nowhere's safe. Dobby said while blue flames danced around his hand. Just as long as you remember, Deku is mine. Bakugo growled, explosions sparking in his hands. Keep your hate to yourself, and remember the plan. Mustard said with a sigh. Whatever. So uncivilized. Mr. Compress sighed in disappointment. The mysterious man with the scythe growled, as long as you all remember that Ace is mine, I don't care what you all do. Let's try to reason with them, now let's kill them all. Twice said in two different voices. Regardless of what happens or what you butts do, this is the beginning of the end. Dobby said with a sinister smirk. It is said that if you wish for peace, you must prepare for war. That was a lesson Dracula placed in his student's head. While peace was possible, the road towards it was filled with chaos. Another lesson he told his students was the realization of why heroes exist. Villains. If villains ceased to exist, then the only type of heroes to still exist are rescue heroes. His words still rung in their heads. When one villain is gone, society will just find another one. It'll have to, because they have to justify all of the heroes' wages. The students realized one thing, they weren't being trained to be heroes. They were being trained to be soldiers. Because of a society that is hell-bent on a CYCL of heroes fighting villains. Dracula warned them in class one day, someday, that CYCL will exacerbate into a war. A war that will result in innocent people, heroes, and villains dying. I wish this wouldn't happen, but it's the sad truth. That's where everyone was right now. In a forest, fighting for their life against a group of villains. It was an ambush and Dracula quickly gathered everyone he could back to the agency building. Pixie Bob was taking care of Kota in the building while Vlad King was asking questions. The hell is going on? Dracula looked over the count of students and realized half of his class was still out there while Vlad's entire class, with the exception of Monoma, were outside as well. Dracula replied, "We're under attack." He looked at Pixie Bob, "Stay here with the kids. Vlad King and I are going to go out and search for the other students." She nodded and the two hero teachers walked out of the agency building and ran to separate sides of the forest to search for their students. With a blue fire burning the whole forest down, Tiger and Mandalay were fighting against Magna and Spinner, a lizard-like man with stain-inspired clothing. A huge tornado of purple gas was seen in the southern side of the forest. Vlad King decided to go there while Dracula made his way to the flames. Dracula launched up into the sky before unfurling his bone wings and flew out. His superior hawk-like eyes allowed him to scan the whole area. Unfortunately, he wasn't having much luck because of the thick trees. If he could get to Mandalay and spread a message to everyone, then perhaps they have a fighting chance. Ace Berkeley and Mina Ashido were having a troubling time against this strange figure with a scythe. The figure had a black coat with a hood, and a decayed skull mask on. The Reaper-like figure swung his scythe down, to which Ace and Mina dodged before Ace pulled a card out of his pajama pocket to fling it at the figure. He pulled his scythe out and cut the card in half. Mina flung some acid at him, to which he used his coat to take an extent of the damage. This distraction was enough to allow Ace to launch himself. The two collided onto the ground and blows were shared. Ace punched him, who punched back, and his Plague Doctor mask was knocked off before receiving a kick to the chest, and the figure got up. Ace! Mina shouted and rushed towards him, only to be backhanded by the figure, who made his way to Ace. Ace groaned before panicking as he realized his face was exposed until the figure used his staff to press against the British student's throat. Ace choked and struggled to push the staff off. The figure growled, "Finally. After all these years, I finally beat you. You didn't deserve all that praise. All the attention, all because you had a lucky quirk. Now I have my revenge." Ace choked out, "I don't know. You." The figure put a knee on his staff to keep him down until he pulled his mask off, and Ace's eyes widened. He had black hair with red eyes. A stubble growing and horrible scars on the right side of his face. His gums and teeth were exposed as his right eye had no eyelids, leaving it exposed. "Recognize me now? J. Jack." Ace choked out, horrified at the sight of his brother. Jack smirked, "Yes, see what your luck has brought. You're left just as ugly as I am, and it's all your fault. It was always your fault." Ace coughed as tears trickled from his eyes. "J. Jack, I am so sorry. Please. I never meant for what happened to go down." Jack growled before looking at Mina, who was shifting and beginning to wake up from her slap, and a cruel smile grew on his face. "Does she know? Does she know what you did to me?" Jack stood up, taking the staff off of his throat, making Ace cough hoarsely and breathe deeply. His brother walked towards Mina and grabbed her by the hair, making her shout in pain before pressing the blade against her throat. Ace shouted hoarsely, "No. Get away from her, you son of a b. She has nothing to do with this." He struggled to get back up and merely stayed on his knees. "Confess your crimes and I won't harm her. Tell her. Tell her exactly who you are." Jack growled as he pressed the blade further into her throat, making Mina cry. "Stop. Stop. Stop." Ace cried out, "I was a bully. I was a villain to my own brother. I treated him like trash all because he had a bad luck quirk and I had a good luck quirk. I'm the reason why we look the way we do. I was the villain who caused the explosion." Mina looked at Ace with tears in her widened eyes. Ace looked back with tears dripping down his cheeks. "I'm so sorry, Mina." "No, you're not." Jack growled. "If you were, you would have turned yourself in. But no, you decided to try and be a hero. You think you can be forgiven." Ace reached his hand out and said, "Please, Jack. Let her go. Punish me. Kill me if it will satisfy your vengeance. Just don't hurt Mina." Jack sneered, "I will punish you. But first, I will hurt you. Now you'll watch her die." Mina's eyes widened as she cried out. Ace, in a desperate measure, pulled out another card and flung it at Jack. It pierced through his chest, making Jack choke out BLD. His scythe cut through part of Mina's throat. Ace shouted, "No." He sprinted towards Mina and held her before laying her head down on his knee. He ripped his shirt off before pressing it against her throat to help stop the bleeding. "Oh God. Oh Jesus, Mina. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry, Mina. I didn't want this to happen." Mina choked on the BLD in her throat and mouth as she looked up at Ace. Ace. Hold on, Mina." Ace looked out towards the surrounding forest and shouted, "Help. Someone help us." There was a flap of wings before Ace looked up to see Dracula land down in front of him. Dracula saw Mina and his eyes widened before kneeling down and removing his shirt to see the cut. He created a flame around his hand before pressing it against her throat, cauterizing it. Ace cried out, "It's all my fault. I just killed my brother to save her." Dracula looked up at him and pressed a hand against his cheek to make him look at his teacher. Ace. Ace, I need you to focus. You did what you could. Right now, I need you to breathe and listen to me. Ace took deep breaths in order to calm down and nodded. Dracula ordered, "Take Ashido back to the agency building. Help is on the way, just stay near her." "Understood. You know where it is?" Ace cried a bit more before nodding and picked Mina up bridal style. He picked up his mask and put it on and began running off towards the building. Dracula looked at Jack, who was on the ground, a hand to his chest. He walked towards the brother and knelt down. He looked at Jack and asked, "Are you happy? Happy with what you did to your own brother?" Jack coughed out some BLD before growling, "He brought this, on both of them. In the end, I won." Dracula used fire on his hand once more on his chest to cauterize the wound. "You may have won, but you will live with what you did." He then punched him in the face, knocking Jack out. Izuku and Momo were scanning the area around them and he asked, "Where's the agency building?" Momo looked at the sky to try and get a sense of direction. "I think we'll know if we make our way to the cliffs. Let's go that way." He nodded before they began running. It was silent, except for the roaring of fire and various animal life. Izuku panted as they were getting closer to the rockside. That was until Momo heard explosions nearby. They were getting closer until her eyes saw a very familiar boy. Her eyes widened before stopping and pushing Izuku out of the way. Deku. Izuku's eyes widened as he watched Momo be blasted away by Bakugo. Momo. He ran towards her only to be blocked by Bakugo, who had a bloodthirsty grin and crazed eyes. Deku. I've been waiting for this moment for a long time. You should have taken my advice. It all would have gone a lot smoother had you just killed yourself. You and that teacher ruined everything. Bakugo launched himself at Izuku, who dodged and began running towards Momo. The vibrations of his feet gave him a better sense of where he was going. He didn't get far as he punched in the back of his head. He fell down before being grabbed by his shirt and bashed in the head against a tree. Izuku became dazed before getting blasted in the face and Ever's voice rang in his head. "I can help you, but I require your permission to operate independently." Izuku was kicked down onto the floor before Bakugo straddled him and began to wail fist after fist on his face. "Die! Die! Die!" Bakugo shouted with each fist. Izuku was starting to lose consciousness before Bakugo pressed his hand against his mouth and he asked, "Hey Deku, want to know what death tastes like?" Izuku couldn't do much and failed to find the strength to pry his hand from his mouth. He shouted in his mind, "Permission granted." Ever said, "Thank you." Suddenly, Izuku grabbed Bakugo's hand and pulled it away from his mouth before using his fingers to jab his throat. This action stunned the blonde bomber before Izuku brought his foot up to kick him off. Izuku launched himself up onto his feet in a smooth motion before Momo came launching at Bakugo and grabbed his arm. Bakugo was about to explode her face when his other arm was grabbed by Izuku, who used his knee to snap his arm. Bakugo screamed before watching as Izuku twisted his arm to point straight at his own face. His eyes widened as Izuku pulled the pin on Bakugo's grenade arm. The explosion encompassed his entire face, which stunned and damaged his skin. My face! Bakugo screamed before Izuku powered up full cowling and knocked his arm back before punching him straight in the face. This launched Bakugo across the forest until he crashed against the cliff. Izuku watched with shock before feeling a sense of control of his whole body, and Eva announced. You now have full control again, Izuku. Momo watched before looking at Izuku, who looked back at her. He couldn't say any more before Momo latched her lips onto his in a heated kiss. His eyes widened at the feeling before closing them and kissing back. They kissed like that for about a minute until they broke apart to breathe. Wow! Izuku said, to which she nodded in agreement. So are we boyfriend and girlfriend? Momo finished, to which he nodded. She answered, I think we are. The two went back for another kiss when they heard Bakugo groan, as if he was waking up. The duo ran down to see the huge crater made with Bakugo in it. Izuku stared down at him with a frown, wondering if this truly was his fault that he became a villain. Momo looked at him before holding his hand. Don't think like that, Izuku. He looked up at her before she spoke. He chose this path. You didn't do this. He looked down before nodding. He looked back up before an idea popped in his head. Momo, can you make a tracker? She looked at him curiously before looking at Bakugo, and her eyes flashed with understanding before she made a small tracking device and placed it inside of his belt. Let's get out of here. Izuku suggested before the two began running away from the scene. It was a couple hours later when the police, fire department, ambulance, and various heroes arrived at the forest. Many of the students, specifically Class 1B, were asleep due to mustard sleeping gas until he was knocked out by Kendo and Tetsu. Mina was the only severely injured student and was ushered into an emergency ambulance in an attempt to stabilize her. Several of the villains were apprehended, such as Moonfish, Mustard, and Jack. All in all, the attack was seen as a botched job, but for all intents and purposes, it was a success. Our story now takes place in Mizurufu Hospital, where Mina is asleep in bed. A bandage wrapped around her throat as she was breathing gently. Ace was sitting down next to Mina and gently held her hand. His plague doctor mask was showing signs of tears and wear. The door opened and he looked up to see all the students walk towards them. How is she doing? Uraraka asked, a hand on her chest at the sight of her. Ace looked down at her before answering, she's stable. They said there won't be any damage to her vocal cords. Everyone breathed a sigh of relief and Scarlet walked towards him before sitting down and placed a hand on his shoulder. You did the best you could, Ace. Her French accent had a semblance of serenity to Ace as he said. This is all my fault. Ace, none of what happened to Mina was your fault. Kaminari said, shocked that he blamed himself for this. That's where you're wrong. This is my fault. That villain attacked her to hurt me. Ace shook his head. Did you know that villain? Izuku asked, which Ace nodded. He's my brother. Everyone's eyes widened at Ace's revelation. He spoke. Jack and I were brothers to a high-ranking politician in London. I was born with luck, he was born with misfortune. I became the favored child and the praise got to my head. Jack was often neglected and I bullied him, showing off that I was better than him. Izuku started to feel a sense of déjà vu with this story. I was a complete CNT, and I hate myself for that. One day at school, in science class, I was playing with cards and then I flung one too far and hit a glass of chemicals. Jack was in front of it. The explosion killed everyone, except for me. Ace pulled off his mask, revealing his face to everyone. On the left side of his face was mangled skin and the side of his mouth showed his teeth and gums. His left eyeball was irritated red with a brown iris while his right eye was green. I should have known that Jack would survive and find me. That's why he attacked Mina. Because I don't deserve to be a hero. I'm an idiot for thinking I could have been better. Everyone was silent and looked at him shocked before Izuku stepped forward. But you are better. Ace looked up at the green-haired kid who continued, would the past you have cared so much for her if she was in this state? Would you not have treated us with kindness and respect back then? Ace looked at him before looking down and realized he was right. You may have been horrible in the past, but look at where you are now. You're a good person, Ace. You're striving to be better, you are better. Don't let what happens hold you down. You're not the only one with a horrible past, Ace. Izuku said. He looked at Mina before squeezing her hand before asking, would she forgive me? Before he even realized it, he felt his hand being squeezed back. He looked up at Mina to see her eyes open and smiling at her. I already have, babe. He breathed a sigh of relief as he lunged and wrapped his arms around her. She grunted before wrapping her arms around him as well. Everyone looked happy that she was awake and forgave Ace. He let go and looked into her black eyes before pressing his lips to hers. She kissed back while caressing his cheek. Kaminari looked at the TV remote and picked it up before clicking the TV on. We now cut to the press conference held by Principal Nizu. He plans to explain what exactly happened in that forest. A reporter said outside the Utah walls. The screen then cuts to reveal the inside at the press conference. Nizu, Dracula, and Vlad King were sitting at the table when Nizu began by saying, "Thank you all for coming. I would like to start off by saying that what happened was nothing short of a tragedy that should never have happened. I promise you that the League of Villains will be held responsible for this cowardly attack." A middle-aged reporter stood up, "Excuse me, but I believe we all deserve the answer as to why your students were in that forest to begin with. It was private grounds, owned by the wild pussycats in an effort to train the students' quirks safely." Dracula answered. "If it was private grounds, then how was the League able to find you?" The reporter asked in a rather condescending tone. "That has yet to be speculated. Now can we have another person ask?" Nizu answers the question before asking, much to the annoyance of the reporter. A female reporter stood up and asked, "My question is the status of the students. Aside from Mina Ashido suffering a laceration to her throat, and a majority of Class 1Bs falling to a villain's sleeping gas quirk, many of the students handled themselves well." Dracula answered the question. "If I may ask, if the reports are correct, Katsuki Bakugo was seen among the League of Villains, yes?" The female reporter asked, to which Dracula replied, "Yes. He was. And whose fault is that?" The same middle-aged male reporter stood up with a sneer on his face. "Who was the one to expel Bakugo when he had such potential as a hero?" Dracula looked at him with a face of annoyance before smirking. "You want to know who is responsible for Bakugo becoming a villain?" "That was a dash," the reporter answered. "You want a scapegoat to blame? Then you need only look into a mirror." Dracula answered, much to the outrage of the reporter. "Excuse me. You're blaming me for him?" "No. Not just you. Your scapegoat is society itself. Think for once in your life. A child is born with the powers of a god and is praised for over 10 years. He believes power and defeating the villain is the only way to become a hero. He was never disciplined and sees everyone as below him. He tortures and belittles the quirkless for wishing to become a hero and even tells one to kill himself. Do you believe a child like that is capable of becoming a hero? I don't think so." It was silent as Dracula looked at everyone before standing up. His height intimidated everyone in the conference. "Yes. I expelled Katsuki Bakugo and potentially made him become a villain. However, in my eyes, and the eyes of the other faculty members, expelling him was the best course of action. He has used his quirk illegally for over 10 years and was never reported for it, nor was his record ever tarnished with. His middle school covered for him and even encouraged his behavior against one izukumidoriya. He became a villain the moment he bullied other children. This conference is over. Nizu said to the silent crowd. As the 3 faculty members left, everyone was left in that hall, silent as they contemplated his answer. Back in the hospital, everyone looked at the TV in shock. Izuku looked down as the memories were floating back to him about his time at Aldera Middle. Momo looked at him with sympathy before holding his hand. He looked up at her with a gentle sad smile. "What now, sir?" Vlad King asked as Dracula, Nizu, and him walked down the halls. Now, if Miss Yaoyorozu's tracking device is to be believed, then All Might and his team will ambush the League and we will finally be relieved of this nightmare. Nizu answered. "We still need to find All for One." Dracula reminded him. "That's where we wait for his move. No doubt, he will attempt to pull them away. That's where you come in, Vlad. No doubt you will be the one to end this." Dracula looked at the chimera with a small smirk, eager to take on All for One and destroy him for good. The chess board has been set, now it's time for him to make his move. It was a cold night in a bar that held the League of Villains. Shigaraki was scratching his neck after watching the press conference. Well, that was AFSHT show. Dobby sighed and turned off the TV. The nerve on that guy. He seriously thinks that society is to blame when he was the one to expel one of his own students. The hubris of him. Shigaraki growled. You gotta admit, he is right about it. Society favors the strong quirks. And it makes them grow really big egos, which in turn makes them really bad heroes. Mr. Compress said. We didn't even capture one of the actual students on the list. Magna said with sadness. That reminds me. Shigaraki said before looking at everyone, even though they couldn't see his face. What exactly happened down there? You were supposed to grab that bird-headed student or Midoriya. What caused you to F up? Shigaraki's 5 fingers grabbed a drinking glass which decayed into dust. This put everyone on edge before Bakugo limped into the bar. Bandages were wrapped around his mouth and left eye. His arm was also in a cast. You look like SHT, mate. Dobby said, much to Bakugo's anger. His growls were muffled by the bandages. Listen, we don't need you giving us rabies, so do all of us a favor and shut the F up, dog. Dobby groaned, which only pissed off Bakugo more. Hey, we're all here because we all want one thing. To have society treat us better and to continue Stain's goal. Spinner, a lizard-like man with a Stain-like costume said. That's your goal. Not mine. Shigaraki retorted. Not to mention, the blonde Siente over there is only here because he's got a serious hate nerve for Midoriya. Not to mention that Grim Reaper-type fellow. He was also here only because of a student. So suffice to say, not everyone is here because of Stain. Dobby said. Regardless of why, we're all here for this delightful show. We all have our part to play, and the curtain has yet to be lifted. Mr. Compress said. My question is, what are we to do about that teacher? He's a complete mystery. He's no hero I've ever heard about. Magna said. It's a good question, one we intend to find out. Dobby said. Are you trying to undermine my leadership? Shigaraki asked Dobby. You think because you make a few speeches, suddenly you're in charge now? You out of your goddamn mind, Shigaraki? Dobby asked. Give me one good reason not to just dust you right now. Tamura. Calm yourself. Kurogyri said calmly. Before anything else could be said, there was a knock on the door. Hello. Pizza DLVRY. Everyone looked at the door before asking, did someone order pizza dash? Suddenly the wall exploded to reveal All Might breaking through. Well, we know you ordered a side of justice, that's for sure. You know why? Because I am here. Kamui Woods barged in and used his wood limbs to restrain the villains. Gran Torino jumped in and knocked Dabi out. Bakugo shouted through his bandages and fought against the wood only to look up at All Might, who simply had a look of disappointment. Bakugo. You were born with an incredible gift, and you used it for the wrong purposes. A hero who thinks for themselves is no hero at all. All Might said, which made Bakugo freeze up before simply letting go. Shigaraki fought against his restraints. You hypocrite. You used your powers, and you couldn't save me. You didn't save me. All of this is your fault. It's over, Shigaraki. Now tell us where All For One is. All Might said, walking towards him. Tamura looked up at him before grinning. Suddenly a TV turned on and a familiar voice was heard. Oh, I'm very close, All Might. Come and find me. I'll give you a clue. The TV turned off before an explosion just north of their location rocked the building. All Might's eyes widened and was about to make his way out of the bar when Dracula's voice rang in his mind. Stay with them, All Might. I will handle All For One. What? But Vlad All Might exclaimed until he was interrupted by him. Tashinori. You're no good to the world dead. He knows your weakness. He will exploit it and surely kill you. Let me handle him. Let me avenge Nana. Dracula said. At the hearing of his MSTR's name, he wilted. As you wish, Vlad. Don't worry, I will end this. Dracula stood on top of the building in front of the bar before looking up at the sky to see the smoke piling up. He unfurled his bone wings before launching off of the building and flew towards the source of the explosion. He saw him. He saw All For One and torpedoed straight towards him before colliding against the supervillain in front of him, Lady, Best Jeanist, Gang Orca, and Tiger of the Wild Pussycats. Dracula landed in front of the heroes and tilted his head until his neck cracked. His cape blew against the wind as his sharp fingernails glistened against the moonlight. It can't be. Gang Orca said with a stutter. It's him. Hey, what are you talking about? Empty Lady asked. It's the infamous Kyuketsuki. An underground hero long before our time. What are you doing here? Best Jeanist asked, to which Dracula turned his head to look at them. It's time this nightmare ended. Get Ragdoll and whatever civilians in the area out. I'll deal with him. Dracula said before looking back only to be hit in the face by a fist. He was launched several yards back before catching his footing and glared at All For One. So the blonde oaf decided he didn't want to come. Instead he sends his pet monster after me. All For One said as he walked forward, pulling his sleeves forward and fixing his suit. Dracula stood up straight and glared at him. Long time, All For One. Indeed it has, though I imagine it's but a blink in the eye for you, Dracula. Dracula heard a helicopter approaching the area, but kept his attention on All For One. Perhaps, but I see you've still got some sounds left to heal. On the contrary, I may be blind, but I will say. Ragdoll's quirk has proved to be most useful. All For One grinned behind his mask. The Vampire King growled before walking toward the supervillain, who made his right hand expand, nearly ripping the sleeve of his suit. Before punching forward, releasing a huge blast of air. Dracula disappeared before reappearing in front of All For One and swiping his sharp fingernails against his helmet, digging through the glass and metal, leaving 4 long lines exposing skin. This in turn made All For One grab Dracula by his hair before throwing him away a couple feet and punching him in the face. Dracula's head snapped upwards before looking back at All For One and making a smirk before punching him in the stomach, causing him to jump a few feet before being grabbed by the collar. The end of your reign, Dracula said, raising his hand, and was about to move his hand through when All For One grabbed his arm and snapped it in half. Dracula growled in pain before being headbutted. This caused Dracula to drop him and back up, a bit dazed. All for One grinned before expanding his arm once more and punched towards Dracula. He was flown back quite a bit before crashing into a building. All for One chuckled. Come on. Where's that strength you used last time? Don't tell me Nana Shimura's death held you down and made you pull your punches. An explosion of concrete rocked the nearby area as Dracula stood out. His cape was tattered as was his coat. He tore off the cape as he glared at All for One. You keep her name out of your mouth or I will tear your heart out with my fangs. Dracula growled, which only made All for One grin under the mask. You and Nana were very close, yes. You two never had children. Want to know a secret? Tamura Shigaraki. His true name is Tenko Shimura. Nana's grandson. Dracula's eyes widened at this news. He shook his head. You're lying. Oh, I assure you I'm not. Nana's son was Kotaro Shimura. All for One said, knowing this would be the truth that would break Dracula. Dracula used his vision to look at his heart. There was no acceleration in his beats, he was telling the truth. Dracula's eyes widened and he froze. His entire body froze as well as his expression. The entire world froze and turned black as he could only see Nana in his mind. Her smile wasn't there, she looked at him cold before dissolving into dust. His heart nearly stopped from strain. That was until his heart began to accelerate as his vision returned to normal, then it began to bleed red. He grit his teeth, revealing his fangs as he clenched his fists. His nails digging into his palms, blood dripping onto the dusty floor. You mot-half. Dracula roared as his form began to change. He began to grow taller and wider as his clothes disappeared into green scales. His face morphed into that of a dragon with two large fangs. Two large horns grew on the back of his head with wings connected to his arms. A large tail slammed onto the ground as he roared at All for One. Dracula, in his demon form, began to charge towards All for One, who expanded his arm once more only for it to be bitten down. He screamed and Dracula raised him up only to slam him onto the ground multiple times. The force snapped his arm out of its socket before Dracula tossed All for One towards a building. All for One groaned in pain as he held his arm when he looked up to see. Dracula charged towards him once more. He opened his jaws and All for One managed to dodge out of the way in time. Dracula collided into the building before snapping his head out to the right. Dracula growled as his eyes burned bright red and got down on all fours before charging towards All for One, who was backing away on his arms. Dracula's jaws snapped shut several times before biting the villain's leg and raised him back up once more and slammed him back down on the ground once more. Dracula let go of All for One's leg only to rise up on his hind legs and slam his foot onto his torso. All for One gripped his talon in a futile effort to get him off. Dracula lowered his head towards All for One before releasing the loudest roar ever known. It was a roar of victory and to force him to submit. After the roar was finished, Dracula stood upright and began to shrink down once more. Dracula reverted back to his human form, except he looked different. His clothing consisted of a black suit, vest and black dress pants with brown boots. A long red overcoat and a large wide-brimmed fedora and round-framed orange-tinted sunglasses and with white gloves with black pentagrams. He had no facial hair as his grin was on full sight. Well, I must admit, you did the one thing no one else was able to do. You really pissed me off. You pushed me so far into using this form. Alucard said as he stepped off of All for One and grabbed him by his collar. All for One weakly tried to claw at his hand as he asked. Well, what the hell are you? Alucard grinned as he used his other hand to tear off the rest of All for One's mask. Alucard looked at the man with no eyes and nose with a grin as he answered. A real vampire. Alucard revealed his sharp teeth before shouting, "Om nom nom nom." and bit into his neck and began to drain his body of all of his blood. All for One's thoughts began to fade as well as his body. All that was left were drops of blood. The drops of blood began to move towards Alucard as he looked at his hand. Now that he had All for One's soul, he had control over all of the quirks he stole over the years. Alucard looked up at the rising sun and the helicopter that flew overhead and grinned widely. Time to rock this F-world to its core. So alright folks, that's all for today. Stay tuned for more crossovers. Do subscribe, like and share for more such videos. Also check out the story and author The Gentleman with a Mustache on FANFICTIONnet. Press the bell icon to be notified first on release. See you in the next video. Till then, goodbye.